You know, if we're going to be reasonable about things, people talk about is faith reasonable? If you're going to talk about the reasonableness of faith, the first question you have to ask, and I actually learned this from the philosopher Immanuel Kant. Kant is very good on all this, and he talks about the fact, one of my favorite quotations from Kant is, "Out of the crooked timber of humanity, no straight thing was ever made." It's Kant's way of saying that human nature is a little bent, it's a little warped. And so we have to design economic and political and social systems that acknowledge that are based on that realistic perception of human nature. If you ignore what human nature actually is, you're going to come up with ideas that don't really work very well in the world. But the greatest contribution of Kant, philosophically, and I'm going to get philosophical only for a minute or two, is actually to say that before we talk about reason, we need to know the boundaries of reason. In other words, we need to know where reason cannot travel. There's no point trying to apply reason where reason can't go. But where is it that reason can't go? And what Kant does is he actually shows that our perception of the world, even the simple things in the world, is actually very limited. He gives a very telling example, and I'm going to adapt the example to our own situation. If I were to go, for example, and stand on the beach, and what do I perceive out there? I perceive the ocean. But how do I perceive the ocean? I mean, the ocean doesn't jump out and go into my head. How do I actually perceive anything? The way I perceive it is I look at the ocean and my mind constructs a picture, a photograph of the ocean. That's how I perceive it. I perceive it in my head. And now Kant asks a very deep question. How do I know that my perception of the ocean is the same as the ocean itself? In other words, how do I know that the picture in my head resembles the reality that it's supposed to be picturing? I mean, think about this for just a minute. Normally, how do we know that two things are similar to each other? If somebody told me, here is a painting, here's the official portrait of Barack Obama. How do I know if this is actually Obama? Well, I need two things. I need the portrait and I need Obama. I need to look at the portrait and then I need to look at Obama and see if the two match. And if they match, I can go, yeah, that's a really good portrait. Looks exactly like Obama. But I need both to do that. But Kant's point is that if I'm standing in front of the ocean and I make in my head a picture of the ocean, I actually only have one thing, the picture. I don't actually have the ocean. I only have the picture I've made in my head, and I can't compare it to anything. In other words, what Kant is actually saying is that when we experience the world, we have only our perception of the world. But the world in itself, the world as it is outside. This is just another way of saying something that all the great religions of the world have always said, and that is, we have the world, we have our perception of the world, but there is a world behind the world. There is another world that we are only dimly aware of, that we see, as the Bible says, through a glass darkly. And human reason can only, you may say, get a whiff of that world. Kant calls it the noumenal world. And so this is the way in which, again, not modern physics in this case, but modern philosophy is beginning to reach out to what we can call the invisible, the eternal, or the transcendent.